Hi, Mike Beckett from The Dead Prophet here. I want to just take a moment and thank you. Thank you for your support and your continued faithfulness to watch our show over the past year as we've launched this ministry. In the upcoming months, we have some great topics, great shows, and great guests that will be joining us on our show. In fact, the next 4 months, we have totally booked for show tapings, and we should have a schedule ready to go for the next 6 months. We do ask that as you continue to watch our show on YouTube, if you would do us one favor, if you would click the subscribe button. One of our goals by the end of 2024 is to reach 1,000 subscribers so we can go to that next level as far as YouTube shows go. Don't forget that you can continue to help support us by going to our website, purchasing one of our items, or giving a donation at thedeadprophet.net. Have a great day. Hi, welcome to The Dead Prophet. I'm your host, Mike Beckett. It's an honor today to have a friend of mine. It's been 23 years. Wow. since we really last touched base. But a friend of mine from Bible College, Mathew George, joining us today. He is a pastor down near the Philadelphia area and really has a great heart for God. But one of the things we want to talk about today, and I've been wrestling with this a little bit myself. One of the recent blogs I just put up there, if you haven't had a chance to get to the website, go to the website and click the blogs. One of the most recent ones I put up there was talking about depression. One of the big taboos we have, I think, in our Christian circles, it's not one of the ones we have. We have it. It's a big one we have, not just one of the ones. These taboos that we have are this mental health stigma that, we're Christians. We don't suffer from mental health. And if we suffer from mental health, then we need to go get the devil's cast out of us kind of deal for mental health. We give the devil way too much credit when it comes to things of mental health. But I don't think people realize that this is something that everybody struggles with on a day-to-day basis. I know in my psychology classes, when they teach psychology, one of the first things I say on the first day is, obviously, how many of you are here because you had to take the class? And that's just about everybody in the class raises their hand, unless they're like a psych major or something. Then they're like, well, I had to take the class, but I wanted to take the class. But I will tell them, I said, if you're in this class and you think that you don't struggle with mental health, you're fooling yourself, because everybody struggles with it to some degree, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, whether it's anger, whether it's just self-doubt, a lack of confidence in yourself, these things that cause you to pause and live what I would feel would be a fulfilling life without those external, targets hitting you. So I think mental health has become this huge stigma within our church circles. We don't want to talk about it. We sweep it under the covers. If you struggle with it, or a Christian couple struggles with it, or someone struggles with it, someone's always saying that. No, you just don't tell people in Sunday school. Don't tell people at church that you're depressed, or you suffer with anxiety, or you have mental health. That's like the big bad word. We're okay with saying things like, well, I struggle with anxiety. But the reality, when we mention that, big buzzword, mental health, it just triggers this, I don't know, the idea I get, and maybe I'm wrong, but the idea I would get is, you're in a white coat, you're behind an institution, you go see some therapist, something's wrong with you, that sort of thing. And I'm hoping today, in our conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to start a few conversations, but hoping in our conversation today, we can kind of address that stigma. And Mathew, you would know, because you're working on a PhD program that's working on your doctorate dissertation in this area, specifically with pastors and mental health. But I guess today, let's just kind of talk about, or start off with, the stigma as believers in Christ that we have when it comes to mental health. I mean, it's something we don't want to talk about. It's something that I would think, unless you are genuine and really have done some self-evaluation, when somebody comes up to you and says, well, I struggle with mental health, most of the times that would turn you off. Like, I'm going to stay away from this person because I don't want to deal with, I don't do it. So let's talk about that. What is the stigma, as believers in Christ, when we hear mental health, what goes on?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for having me. After so many years, I'm so glad we were able to connect. And I'm just thankful that we're having this conversation. I, like you said, have the honor of serving in ministry, at the same time pursuing, more about this topic in a doctoral program at Eastern University currently. And I'm just so glad to have this conversation with you. So when it comes to mental health, we need to start, like you said, addressing the whole stigma piece, right? There was a study done at Auburn University, and this study was really focused on, what do the public feel about mental health? And so what they did was they had two groups of people, right? They had the subject, and they had a proctor. So, for example, the subject was told that, we're going to provide, care for you, and be able to answer some questions as a result. And then the person who was doing the questioning was said, hey, every time you sort of, hear this conversation about mental health, and, just push a button, when you think that this person is not really being honest, in their mental health description. And so, and so every time, so the study began, and the question began to flow. And anytime there was a biochemical sort of discussion came up, right? It seemed that the person doing the questioning would press that button every single time, because they just didn't believe that this was something that individuals dealt with in their biology. The general consensus was, this is just something that has happened to you. It's not really a disease. It's something that you just sort of, you need to change your friends, or you need to, change your environment. And even in a higher education institution, it was sort of proved that as soon as people heard about this whole mental health issue, it sort of brought something in them that prompt them to push that button over and over again. So when we think about stigma, we think about like the downplaying of mental health, right? Like, it's not really a big deal. Like, people say something like, "Oh, the Phillies lost again, and I'm depressed." Well, you might be feeling sad, but when you say, "I'm depressed, the Phillies lost again,"
yeah,
it's a downplaying of what depression really is, right? Like, when people get depressed, it's a whole different level of feeling like, I am in this place and I'm not able to get out of it,
right.
And just struggling. And I would say, number two, it's this argument that, it's a new thing. Like, this mental thing, this has just happened in the last 50 years. Social media is playing a big part in it. But to be honest, mental illness is not a new phenomenon. I mean, even as you look at the scripture, you see examples of you see Elijah, the mighty prophet, in 1 Kings 18, after this amazing victory over the prophets of Baal and Asherah, here he is, putting his head between his legs under a juniper tree and wanting to die.
Yeah.
Almost
God,
saying,
kill me now. I'm done. I can't handle it anymore. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then you got people like Gideon and Jacob. I mean, you got so many characters who've gone through this. And even as you come to the New Testament, there's many examples of folks struggling with mental illness. Even the Apostle Paul says, I was so, just dealing with the pain that I thought we were going to die, and so and then I would say also that this this stigma, like believing that it's not manageable. If you have mental illness, you're done. I mean, it's you should be in a mental hospital somewhere, and you don't have any hope. But we know from research that half the population in this country at some point will seek out support for mental health, and 1/3 is on some kind of medication currently to treat their mental illness. I mean, that's almost 30% of the population. And so we know it's a real phenomenon, and clergy like me, we're in the fight, and we want to make sure that we don't ignore it, but point out the stigmas, but help people process it.
Right. And it's interesting because I find it funny that we still have this debate even within, mental health, but even within church mental health, there's this nature nurture debate still going on. You had mentioned, the biochemical component when pressing the button, and I think we don't realize the biochemical makeup of ourselves. We are always so quick within our circles to blame the devil for something. It's the devil's fault, or like you said, you need to change your friends. You need to change something in of what you're doing so that you can fix it. We're very much, mental health is maybe nurtured. I know there are people, when you look at it, you grow up in an environment where you have angry parents and everybody yells and screams. Well, then when you grow up, you're angry, or that kind of plays off of you. And yes, that's a nurtured trait. But I think we often discredit or not give enough credit to the nature component, the biological, chemical DNA makeup of an individual. I mean, when we look at when we look at addicts, you can be born an alcoholic in your DNA, and it's the way it is. I mean, you look at countless studies that have been done on alcoholics and generational alcoholics, and there are people who would never touch a drink, but there are those people who touch it for the first time and they're hooked. But when you look at their history, 5 out of 6 of the people in their family are either a drug addict, some sort of addiction. And it gets us to think and wonder these days, maybe is addiction a little more than just a taught trait? Is it something that could be in the DNA? And that's part of the being born into the sinful man, being born into Adam. And I think we miss that portion of things so many times. And I really feel bad for those people in our churches that really struggle with things, but they're afraid to talk about it because, if I mention something to someone that I'm really close friends with, what will it be like? Will they embrace me as Christ would embrace us, or are they going to get away from me? Next thing you know, by next week, the whole church knows that you're suffering from anxiety or something of that nature. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's so funny you bring up the whole topic of addiction, Michael, that it's a pretty direct correlation, right? When you talk about mental health, you just can't ignore the whole concept of addiction. And as you said, that whole discussion of habit or disease is a major point of contention for many people. And I think as you mentioned, there is the genetic component of it, right? Like there's this concept of through generations, there's opportunity for genes to be affected in human beings, and so now that doesn't mean that you don't have an option, like you're going to be stuck in that predicament. But what we are saying is that we need to pay attention to the markers, the genetic markers that could have an impact on certain individuals, sort of falling into that trap, and being fully aware of that so that we can make positive decisions, right? So, there's this book that we recently looked at by Kent Dunnington. It's called Addiction and Virtue, and he talks about how, this idea of addiction is that everyone's trying to reach a higher virtue, and because they don't know how to get it, they sort of go to drugs or various other things to reach a higher virtue in their life. And what Dunnington is arguing is that the church need to be involved in that. The gospel is actually has the power to say that this virtue you're seeking after is actually something that Jesus is offering, right? Like in John chapter 4, Jesus says, if you drink the water I give you, you'll never thirst again. What does that mean? It just means that having this desire to be able to accomplish something with our purpose. Like we all need purpose, right? Like we live our life and we get satisfaction from fulfilling some kind of work. Like, okay, work is not just making money. Work is actually something that gives us our purpose, our identity, a sense of like, oh, I accomplished something today, right? And that sort of allows us to mentally feel good about ourselves, right? There's just chemicals just being released in the brain as you begin to just make positive impact. And so at the same time, that doesn't mean that we ignore the biological aspect of it. That there's the whole concept of my grandfather, my father, and genetically speaking, I am affected by my environment as a result of what I'm going through. So, and for churches today, I think we really need to go back to the basics of the great commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Right, and so mind is involved in that. I mean, I think if we're going to talk about mental health, we got to be able to say we are a trichotomy: body, soul, spirit. And I would say that the mind is the soul of the spirit, right? I'm sorry, the seat of the soul, excuse me. And you need to be able to say, how does worshiping God with the mind, what does that look like? And so involving the mind in our relationship with God is so important, and not just I went to church and had a wonderful service. No, how is this affecting me in my mind, and how can I serve God in a healthy way with as a whole being, mind, soul, spirit?
Yeah. Our pastor, it's funny, every now and then he'll say, Jesus lives in my heart, but grandpa still lives in my bones. We've got that component there. And you talked about, the struggle of habit versus disease. Why do you think it's such a big contention point for believers? Why do you think? I mean, obviously we would see in the world, it could be a contention point. They're looking for that hope that we get. They're looking for that living water that we get, that we have through Christ. They're missing that hope. So I could understand maybe, okay, the contention and the fight there, but why is it such a big contention issue within Christianity? Why do we always come up to the point to when we talk about mental health, it's sweep it under the carpet. Let's not deal with it because it's a big issue. Why do you feel that is?
I just think that that the education piece of mental health has not been something that has been practiced, in our churches. I think we, especially in the, in some of the, I would say, charismatic circles, there's so much emphasis on my feeling and what I'm experiencing that I think that oftentimes we can get caught up in it feels good, Sunday feels good, and not really let it shape our decisions. Like during the week, it's just it's a good feeling, but then how does the things I believe shape my decision making throughout the week? So as you look at, again, talking about this argument, what Dunnington would say is that there's this lack of acceptance, I think, when it comes to in the Christian community, that this aspect of human beings, of sort of being dragged into something, like being dragged into something, it can have significant impact on what we believe about ourselves. So he'd say that, there's this power of addiction cannot be adequately appraised until addiction is understood, as this enactment, a quest for a relationship with God. And so his whole argument is that people are seeking addiction, but then we can't just distance that from our relationship with God. We have to say, okay, how does what you're trying to do impact your relationship with God? Do you see a correlation here? Do you see you seeking for a higher virtue? And most people just think, oh, it's physical. It's not just physical.
Right.
It's actually more than that. You're trying to find escape from your pain. And it's an emotional connection. And so as you're involved in mental health, you have to ask yourself, okay, God has something to do with this. I need to be able to open up, my thought process to say that it's not just, something that my mind is dealing with. I need God's help to be able to figure out, how to process these feelings of mine, not just medication. Now, medication, we need it. But at the same time, we also need the support of the community, the spiritual community that is surrounding us to be able to process this.
I just interviewed a lady. It's interesting. In the midst of doing this, the whole purpose when I started this podcast, I sat back and I was thinking, what can be a cool tagline? Everybody has their cool tagline. Of course, my kid keeps reminding me that he has more views than I do. And of course, he just does these goofy things like scares me and posts it on his YouTube channel. Interesting. She was talking, and she's a therapist, and she said, and the person she was talking with happens to be in charismatic circles, but accidentally, I have kind of come across people who've reached out to me and have shared the abuses and the scriptural misrepresentations within the hyper charismatic movement, I guess is the best way to put it. Because not every charismatic is the same,
Right.
And I think we even in our Pentecostal circles, we have embraced some of that stuff that used to be on the fringe that is now, that new apostolic kind of push to rewrite scripture to, it's not based about, don't worry about what the word says, worry about, like you had said, your experience. Let's go off of our emotional connection. And she had shared a story about a person she had whose parents were very charismatic, in fact, pastors, and told the daughter, you got to get off your schizophrenic medication. Now, if you know anything, and I know you do because you studied it, the common person, one of the things that you had said was education piece of mental health is missing. And it is, because if we just take a basic psychology 101 class, we'll understand, dopamine and all of the other types of neurotransmitters that are in our brain. And when they don't work, when the pistons aren't biologically firing correctly, that's where we have things, you get Alzheimer's, you get Parkinson's, you get schizophrenia, you get anxiety disorders, depression, and all that thing. And so what medication does is enhances those defaults or those over-firing pistons. And, there's a reason when, like if you're schizophrenic and you're hearing voices and things that you're on particular medications, because over the years we have found that there are certain things, pistons in the neurotransmitters in your brain that aren't biologically functioning correctly. And that's not a nurture thing. That's a biological makeup within your system. And, so she got off the medication and she started hearing voices and things talking to her because the pistons in her neurotransmitters weren't doing what they're supposed to do, which was what labeled the individual as being a schizophrenic. And so then in the charismatic circle, everybody felt they have to summons these demons and cast out these demons. And it had nothing to do with demonic possession and had everything to do with the biological makeup and the neurological misfunction of the piston firing within the brain. And that's due to the lack of education. And, so the girl got back on the medications and, lo and behold, guess what happened? She wasn't hearing voices anymore. And she's functioning as as what you would consider a normal person. I mean, of course, normal, as I always tell people, normal is just the setting on my washer. But the reality is, she's functioning as an adult who can function in society because the medication she took enhanced or addressed those misfirings or overfiring pistons of neurotransmitters. So there's always that, like you say, Christian circles, there's that, oh no, you're on medication, something's wrong with you. The reason we have medication is because, with the research, with the studying, with whatever your psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors have found, is that something in the brain isn't doing what it needs to do to allow you to function in a way that you can function day to day without that struggle of the mental health overcoming you. So those medications are useful for that. But I find so many times in our Christian circles, we want to say, no, get off your medication. You don't need your medication. You need, what you need is God. And that's true. We need God. But I always, it's like that group of people. Sometimes you have those groups of religious cult sects out there that we refuse to take medication because God's going to heal us. Yeah. I'm not going to take it. I've got cancer. But, I sit back and I think, God in all of his wisdom and love and might has given us the ability to research and find ways to help us in those moments. To me, that's grace and mercy of God. That's the answer that we've been looking for. Maybe it's not the best. But again, we have to keep in mindset that we are fallen, and there's so much dysfunction in us because of us being from the first Adam, and we're never going to be to that point to where we've reached our glorified bodies until we're with Christ. So, I mean, there's always that stigma of oh, you're medicated. I think comes off, like you had mentioned a little while ago, is the lack of education within our circles on mental health. And
if I could jump in real quick, and yeah. I know I mentioned, as far as Dunnington's argument of higher virtue and seeking God, and Dunnington is not saying that, somehow that that we should not be, taking medication.
Yeah.
I think the whole argument comes from what has happened to you. It's a curiosity stance, right? Like, what has happened to you as you were growing up? What was your upbringing like? And there's this idea of, I'm sure you've heard of this. It's called the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and people who score like 3 or higher on the ACEs have found to have mental illness 50% of the time of all the folks who've had mental illness. And so they studied like 17,000 people and found that who were struggling with mental illness, and found that ACEs had a major impact of their childhood. And so this whole idea of support systems and attachment, when we're young, 2-parent homes and secure attachments with systems around us, for our family of origin and out, I think is so important. And I think that, while we emphasize, the importance of the biology factor, we also want to emphasize the importance of the interpersonal connections as individuals are growing up. And so, we're seeing a big jump in mental illness and things like that recently. We're also seeing a big jump in mothers giving birth in hospitals without a paternal figure by the bedside. And so there's a correlation, I would say, between the trauma of childhood and the impact of mental health as individuals are growing up. I mean, it's just unavoidable to think about. So, the risk factors of childhood trauma and experiences that individuals go through has just major impacts. And I would say that to parents everywhere to really pay attention to your child, especially as he or she is young, growing up to like that age of 9 and 10, to really emphasizing the secure base, a place where he or she feels connected, and a place where they can be themselves with individuality, so that they feel freedom to explore. We cannot explore freely without having a secure base. And when you explore without a secure base, at that point, you're just opening yourself up to all kinds of things.
Right.
But if you have a secure base, then you can explore freely, knowing who you are. And I think that is the balance we want to encourage families to get at.
Yeah, and it's a challenge. I know for myself, I grew up in the most. I probably would, if my mom and sister and were still alive, and some of my family members are still alive, I'd be a great dissertation. My family growing up would be a great dissertation for anybody going to get their PhD in psychology. But the reality is, you had mentioned there's a lot of women who are giving birth. There's no paternal figure there. I mean, we look at the crime rates in inner cities, and we've linked, the increase in crime rates, and it's interesting because it really doesn't matter. I don't think, if we were to go back and really look at the statistics, I don't think it would matter whether you were white, Black, Spanish, whatever your ethnicity is. If there is a male figure that is missing in the family, if there's that stable father figure that's missing in the family, the likelihood of those children, especially the male children, getting involved in crime and filling that void with something else is much greater. And even with females, we see the uptick in sexuality being younger, and the uptick of, other types of things that you may think that, okay, if there was a stable father figure in the home, that might have quelched it a little bit, so we see all of these different things and have these evidence. So obviously mental health is a stigma. We struggle with it. I know a couple years ago when we changed churches, we adjusted churches because of the one we had gone was more like a home missions church, and there wasn't really anything for our son as we got into the youth group age. And I remember one of the series they were doing were on mental health. The church we go to has a Christian counseling association of like Pennsylvania or something. They rent from churches office space, and they put their counselors in there and partner with the churches. So they had gotten together and kind of started to break the stigma, but you could still sense, especially generationally, there's certain things depending on where you are on the generational line as to what you do and don't talk about in front of people and in public. But, mental health obviously is a stigma within the church, but I know you've been pastoring for years. How does mental health impact our clergy? When we look at Christianity and we look at pastors, we bring a pastor in, and I think the biggest problem we've always faced is we put our pastors on such a high pedestal before they even get in. We automatically think that pastors aren't human, but they struggle. They struggle with mental health. And I mean, I would think, it's like being a teacher. When I went into education and I started teaching, it's like, well, you'd get the complaint from parents. Well, teachers only work from 7 to 12, and they have summers off and weekends off. And I'm thinking, no, 7 to 3 or whatever it is that we work. That's our showtime. We've done all the work ahead in the outside, like pastors. Well, you only work Sundays. No, you don't. You're 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. Vacations interrupted, family time interrupted. And that plays a toll on a pastor. And so what do clergy face in regards to mental health? Maybe you've experienced something, or you have friends in ministry. Sure. I know you have kind of your like a presbyter type role, I think now, right? In which you're at. In fact, you and I both know Pastor Art. when we were church searching back in Lancaster County area, we had gone to his church for quite a while, and what is the reality for clergy? We as believers struggle with it.
Yes.
And I've just been starting to come to the realization, like I struggle with depression. I have struggled with anxiety. I have anger issues because of the environment I grew up in. I would say that the anger issues that I struggle with are probably more nurture and default, but the anxiety and depression that I struggle with are probably neurological, to a degree, and so what that would be like me. I'm the typical person who attends your church, but what about the pastors? I mean, there's
Yes.
got to be some mental health struggles for pastors in ministry. Explain that to me a little bit.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I serve as a pastor. I've been pastoring as a lead pastor since 2011, so it'd be 12 years this year, and been in the ministry since 2003, doing various roles, youth pastor and also as an associate pastor. But Mike, I think what I find is that we're in the middle right now of an intense season when pastors feel like they have to be everything for the church. I mean, for example, since post World War II, like evangelists like Billy Graham, right, presided over the growth of the evangelical movement in America, 1960s and 70s. I mean, it was just a boom in the evangelical movement, and right now there's probably around 375,000 churches in America, according to Pew Research. And in this setting, we find that clergy in the evangelical movement I'm talking about, are dealing with balancing not just the pastoral ministry side of it, but they're trying to figure out, okay, how can I be an entrepreneur, right? Like, how do I grow the church? And they're trying to figure out, okay, how can I make sure the church is financially safe? Like, how can I raise funds? And then they're saying, okay, how can I have social media that's really good, right? Like, how can I have social media exposure? And then they have to do, okay, well, there's volunteers. How do I train volunteers and make sure that they're supposed to be good leaders and lead teams? And then life groups or small groups. Pastoral care to the elderly. I mean, we're talking about a whole lot of expectation that has been placed upon the lead pastor. And, all the research is telling us that they're dealing with their own sort of mental health issues right now, especially balancing all of that with their family life.
Yeah.
And so that first generation, they just did church. I mean, I know I'm generalizing right now, but
right.
If you look at some of the PKs of that generation, most will tell you like they didn't see their fathers, right? Like they were just gone. They were just doing ministry. And that generation following now, the pressure of fulfilling all of these other hats is now on adding pressure. So there's denominational pressure of growing your church, and what are the numbers? What how many attenders? What are the tithe that look like? And so ethically, it's a dilemma for pastors to be able to fulfill all of these roles and keep a healthy family life and keep a personal self-care that is manageable for them. So expectations, I think, and roles are playing a big role.
And what'd you say when we look at it? Your mega churches are like far and few between when we think about it.
Right.
I know out here in one of the denominational districts that's out here, there might be 2, maybe 3 on the whole western part of the state that you could say would be a mega church. And we're talking, like churches that are 500 plus, if you're going to even stretch it. But the majority of your church, and in those churches, remember, I don't know if you remember, did you ever have Dr. Lee in college? Was he ever a professor when you were there? maybe toward the tail end of when I was there, he came in, or maybe he was at the beginning. I can't remember. But then he had left by 2000. But one of the things he had said in a book he had kind of wrote was that really to have a healthy pastoral staff, you have a pastor for every 50 people, not 50 families. Because if you think about it, most of our churches are small churches. And we say small churches, we're under 500 people. I mean, that today, your average, a good church is probably going to be about 200 to 300 people, but your average, most of your churches are less than that. And so your pastor has got to fulfill all the roles, not only just what you had said, but then your senior pastor of that church is also your youth pastor, your associate pastor, the care pastor, the marital counseling pastor. I mean, so the hats progress and keep going, and that creates a lot of pressure, like you said, on those pastors, and it's sad because the expectations we have for pastors, if you think about it, we would never have those expectations for us as parishioners.
Mike, I think these numbers, I'm just sort of pulling it off my head right now. I think that 80% of churches in America are around 60 in attendance, and then you have the numbers go up. So, and that's all a pastor can manage. Like one person can probably manage that, and even still, I think what happens with pastors is they take on more than what they can manage. They don't want to say no. Saying no is not something that pastors are willing to do, because at the end of the day, we don't want no one to leave the church, and we want everyone to stay. And we want, we're talking about without members who are faithfully giving and serving, we can't really reach the community and so the pastors feel the pressure of making sure that, okay, I'm going to do everything I can for everyone, kind of thing. And that's really unhealthy. And I think that we need to emphasize the importance of key leaders in the body who are willing to say, hey, pastor, how can I be able to serve the church? Not serve you, serve the church, because it is God's church. And pastors need to just be able to relinquish that. I think Craig Rochelle says, if someone else can do your job at around 80% of the quality that you can do your job, even sometimes he says even 70%. So if someone can do 70 to 80% of what you are doing, let it go.
Let them do it.
Let them do it. Because, we feel like, if I have to do it right, I have to do it. I'm sorry, if it has to be done right, I have to do it. I think that sort of pastors also have to understand, I've got to let go of this, and I've got to assign some people to serve in the ministry so that I can have a family day with my wife and my children, or my husband and my children, or I can have a day of Sabbath to myself where I can just sort of focus on what are some things that are important for my own self-care. So I think it's also all the pastors, and I know I'm a pastor myself, but pastors have to learn how to just sort of let go and understand that you don't have to control it all, and the members of the church have to step up and say, hey, how can we serve?
Right.
What are some areas we need to serve? And instead of just waiting for the pastor to call on you, I think you need to proactively go to the pastor and say, hey, I understand that there's a lot going on here, and I've got about 3 hours a week. If you tell the pastor, I've got 3 hours a week to serve, I've got 1 hour a week to serve, let me tell you, that's a blessing for a pastor. Because if I get someone to come to me and says, I've got 2 hours to serve, pastor, how can I serve the church? Oh man, it's just going to be a blessing. So
you go to your filing cabinet and pull out all those things you'd love to have done.
Oh my gosh. And I'm telling you, so many more things can get done when people step up like that, and it just makes ministry enjoyable again. Yep. And so we, as the apostle Peter and John and the disciples, had to say, hey, listen, help us to take care of this issue with the widows and their meals, so that we can focus on prayer and the teaching of the scripture, right? And so focusing on ministry can become much more enjoyable when we know that the other aspects of the church, such as social media and special events and outreach, all of these areas are sort of covered with key leadership from the church.
So in a society today, there's a lot of push on coaching, mentoring. Let's come alongside and be a coach. Let's come alongside and be a mentor. But I would say, in the years of doing ministry for myself, we've gone out a lot, and we've gone out and spoken at churches. We do worship services at churches, and in that time of doing that for the last 20 some years, I've gotten to know pastors regularly, and it seems that when I'd go in, it's I've been a magnet, or we've been a magnet, where pastors just kind of dump on you because they can't dump on you with their, if I attended their church, they couldn't dump on, what they struggle with or the stresses they're going through and things of that nature. But, who counsels our pastors? It's great to have a coach come alongside, but coaching isn't counseling. It's great to have a mentor come aside, but mentoring isn't. Who's there to counsel our pastors and their families? Who's there to walk the journey with them? I mean, because I'm sure it is very difficult being a pastor and saying, I need to just go talk to somebody to kind of just, these are some things I need to just dump so that I feel, because we can talk to the Lord anytime we want, but there's something different with going and sitting down with a counselor or a therapist and saying, hey, these are struggles I have, or I just need to go and kind of, if you will, have a clean out session every couple months, just so that my mind is fresh. Who does that for our pastors? Because it seems to me that there aren't people out there. We're all pushing this coaching. Oh, we want to come coach and help you build your church from 20 to 2,000. We want to mentor you so that you can, do X, Y, and Z and be the best, bring those sermons that's going to keep the people. But who helps those pastors that struggle with mental illness? Because if we're realistic, we're all human. And if our parishioners are struggling with it, I'm sure at times our pastors are struggling and need to talk to somebody. Who's there for them?
Now, Mike, what you're saying there is every single pastor need an emotional connection. That's what you're saying, right? Like, it's not just people who are struggling with, just mental illness, if you will. I think we all need a place to be able to just sort of, let down, right? When you look at the scripture and you look at the Apostle Paul and you look at Timothy and Titus, for example, right? And you see the kind of language the Apostle Paul uses when he's talking about Timothy. I think in 2 Timothy chapter 1, he says, I always think about you, and and remember your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and you're always in my prayers. And he says, of course, the scripture, talks about, making sure that you don't let the cares of the world, sort of pull in. God has not given us a spirit of fear. That's what I'm thinking about, but power, love, and a sound mind. Mm-hmm. And Paul is sort of speaking into Timothy. Two things are happening, I would say. Timothy has given permission for Paul to speak into him, right? Mm-hmm. Paul feels comfortable with that. And the second aspect there is that Paul is not afraid to do it. Mm-hmm. And so you need these two things to happen. You need pastors to feel like, okay, I'm going to give permission for someone to speak into me. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to yell at you. And it's just a place where you could just be like, hey, man, I'm nervous. Like I have a council member who's a faithful tither, but it seems like, this person wants to do something that I don't really feel comfortable doing. And so how do I deal with that? Mm-hmm. and to have these sort of elders, and I don't mean that elders in episkopos way. I mean elders in a way that individuals that are seasoned. And I know that that's literally not the word elders is, but someone that you can sort of lean on to just sort of connect with. So I would say that pastors to seek these people out. Mm-hmm. Instead of waiting for them to come to you, you've got to be able to seek them out and give them permission. Mm-hmm. If you were a person who was in an elderly position, and I came to, I think that you would be very happy to have someone come to me and say, and can we just get together once a month for coffee? I mean, like, and
Mhm.
especially if you're a retired minister, or someone who is going through the experience of being what it's like to be a pastor,
Yeah.
or even otherwise, just like a friend, someone who's going to be a non-judgmental presence, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that people will love that, and I just think that we need to emphasize the twofold connection. I'm giving you permission, and the other person feels like, hey, I'm going to speak into you, and it's not going to hurt you, because for Paul to say those words, God has not given you a spirit of fear, son. In
Yeah.
my own
Yeah.
words, like it sounds more like he's sort of giving him a talk, but I think that Paul is speaking to like a son, and
Mhm.
and of course we know that's how he considered Timothy, a spiritual son,
Mhm.
and we need fathers and we
Yeah.
need sons, but we need fathers, and
Yeah.
by the grace of God, in my experience, I found that I have a group of four guys that we get together, and then I also have one person that I call on, who is an overseer, and he's a retired minister, and I drive 3 hours, Mike, just to hang out with him, because
Mhm.
that's how much I value my time with him. And so I'll
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm buying you lunch, and so he won't let me buy me lunch, and we take turns, but I'll drive that long to
Mhm.
be able to spend a few hours with him, because it just talk about the mental health piece of it.
Yeah.
It really boosts my mental health to be able to be with him.
Yeah. I've always had this kind of concern, with ministry schools. I feel, that first generation of Billy Graham group, like you said, they were never home. They just did their thing. They lived at the church. You practice sometimes. Wife would come bringing you your food. That kind of thing. But I feel that there never really has been a good model set forth in
Mm,
evangelicalism for that Paul Timothy relationship for our people who are graduating Bible colleges in
mm,
ministry, whether youth
yeah,
ministry, pastoral ministry, whatever. There's never been that push to um, develop that Paul Timothy relationship. It's like we train you, we give you the tools to equip you, and then we just throw you out there into the sea of sharks and expect you to tread water. But really the important thing is to have a successful pastor and have a successful ministry that really impacts the kingdom. I think we need to have more of those Paul Timothy relationships. Now, granted, more Paul Timothy starts out coaching, mentoring, but eventually gets to that point to where it's counsel session, where you have given that individual the right to speak into your life and say, you you really don't want to do this. You don't want to go down this road, because if you do, this is what will happen. A lot of people are so quick to, I want to go out and build my ministry. We've lost right there. You've lost the purpose of the gospel.
mm.
I'm going to go out and build my ministry.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
which when I look at some of the, and like I said, I was totally not expecting to go down this other topical venue of charismatic churches, and I had people starting to reach out to me saying, I was entrenched in the charismatic movement and I've been spiritually abused, and
Mm,
things of that nature, where we've twisted scripture to
sure.
build my ministry, or whoever that individual is as ministry, that we've lost the focus of God. I wonder if we would start impressing upon the hearts of people who graduate that you're not going to be a senior pastor until you've developed that relationship, because it's crucial to your mental health. I mean, when you
Mike,
think about it, it is crucial to your mental health and well-being to develop that relationship, especially if you're going to be in full-time ministry, so that you can function. Because how many people in ministry, how many pastors' kids are atheists? How
mm,
many pastors' wives have left their husband, lost the faith? There's one I've talked about several times. His name is Frank Schaefer. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. I have not started reading the book. Well, I can't lie. I've read 30 pages of the book. But he is a pastor's son who his dad and Jerry Falwell, he was his dad and Jerry Falwell outmixed in the moral majority in the 80s, to where, as a result, he wrote a book saying, I still believe in God and I'm an atheist. Now, I'm not going to go in and promote his book. I'm not doing it to promote his book, but he basically is an atheist. And when you think about it, you've got to look at, well, how did that happen? Obviously, there was something that broke down in the family that caused what he was seeing in his dad to say, wait a second here, this isn't Christianity. If this is Christianity, you're missing it, Dad. You're missing the whole purpose here. So we have a lot of people in ministry whose children we're losing them. And I wonder if that's because there hasn't been this push, this importance on, let's have that Paul-Timothy relationship so that you can be successful, because you need to be, and it seems to me that, when I look at the scriptures and I look at Paul and Timothy, Paul was obviously the apostle and spoke into Timothy's life, but I wonder if Timothy didn't also sometimes do the same to Paul. Maybe Timothy said, hey, Paul, take a break, slow down for a day. You need a day of rest. You're constantly going at 110%. Relax today. Go out and walk into the fields and just meditate on the Lord and have a day for your, you wonder if Timothy didn't say that and wouldn't have had the ability to speak into Paul's life at some times, because, our older generation tends to just go at 110 while, hey, take a break there, buddy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So Second Timothy, the book of Second Timothy is the last book that the Apostle Paul is writing. So we know that Apostle Paul is probably towards the end of his life, as he's being poured out, as he says, right? But in Acts chapter 16, you see a Paul who's about to go on a missionary journey and meets a young man named Timothy, who is biracial, by the way. His father was a Gentile, his mother was a Jew. And so here's a young man who is probably struggling with his identity a little bit. He's probably
especially in that culture. I mean, when Roman culture, if you were Gentile Jew, it was like, a taboo there. I mean, it's like you don't have authority to speak because you're not a purebred, as they would say.
That's correct. I was just going to say, yeah. So he's probably struggling with his identity of, okay, I'm not a full Jew, and my Gentile friends think I'm this Jew, and so he's got. I'm just sort of looking into the psyche of Timothy, if you will. And so he's probably dealing with this thing throughout his life, like even from chapter 16 of Acts. And now he's been pastoring a long time as Paul is writing these letters, to him. And because, the missionary journeys are done. Paul is now in house arrest in Rome and waiting for his trial with Caesar. And so the relationship is the key, is what I was trying to say. It started a long time ago, right? Like, it started in Acts 16 when this young man, Timothy, met Paul. And Paul is probably not that old, in that time, and sort of journeying with Timothy. And I think the relationship is the key. It doesn't really have to be old and young. I think it just has to be a transparent relationship, a relationship that is, hey, I'm going to trust you to tell me the truth, right? Like, I'm going to trust you to tell me the truth. And the person will know how to say it, based upon how he or she's perceiving, how it will be received. Jesus said to his disciples, I've got many things to tell you, but I can't tell you. Just because they were not ready to receive what he had to say, right? And so we all know that. There's some things we can say to people and some things we can't say to people. They're just not able to receive it in this season of their life. And I think that for Paul and Timothy, they've grown together. They've gone on mission trips together. Timothy has probably seen Paul and Barnabas separate, right, because of John Mark. And so there's been a lot going on. They've gone through all kinds of dynamics in their relationship. And so to be able to build that trust factor is the key. You just can't meet someone next tomorrow and say, hey, can I come see you every week, or once a month? It's got to be somebody you've known and build a relationship with that you trust. But that's the key. I think pray on that. I would say encourage pastors to pray on that. Let the Lord sort of lead you, to that person, because, even if you're pastoring 60 people or 20 people, or 600 people. At the end of the day, we're all going to stand before the Lord one day, right? The whole argument of the talents is 5 talents to 2 talents and the 1 talent. God wasn't expecting the guy with the 1 talent to produce like the 5 talent guy, right? Just be faithful with what you've been given. And I think, and the reward is the same to everybody at the end of the day. And so faithfulness is the key. And I think doing it in a healthy way, and making sure that you love the people that God has sent your way. Now, listen, healthy things grow. That's normal. I'm not saying, be content, but I am saying that let's not be overwhelmed with, sort of, I got to get to 2,000 people in 2 years or whatever, and lose ourselves, our families, and our children, because at the end of the day, as you say, that's our first ministry, right? Like we want to make sure that we are the same person here at the house that we are at the church, and the children are watching.
Yeah. So, how does obviously mental health impacts those of us who are within the church? The everyday believer in Christ. It does impact and can impact our pastors. How about the family? I sometimes joke because back in the day, it's like pastors' wives were expected to play the piano. You look at the old time Pentecostal or old time pastor's wife, and they all can play the piano, and that's what they did. I'm sure the expectations that are placed on the pastor impact directly the family, and who's really there for them.
Thank you again for asking this question. There's this concept called a package deal that there's sort of an unwritten rule, if you will, right? Like you bring in a pastor, you're expecting his or her spouse to fulfill certain roles in the church. It's just an unwritten rule, and you say, play the piano. I think what we find is that the package deal is saying, I need you to be a gap filler. So if the Sunday school teacher doesn't show up, the pastor's wife is teaching today. I mean, forget about the fact that she was supposed to be doing something else. Like whatever it is that needs to be done, the pastor's spouse is going to do it. And I think this is a danger, because you're completely taking away the autonomy of the pastor's spouse. Like you just do what needs to be done, kind of thing. And that's what we've been taught, over the years.
We don't give them an identity in and of themselves. We just associate them with, well, you're just the, it's funny. Well, you're just the pastor's wife, or you're just the pastor's husband, or you're just, there's no.
And even that, like they forget to even say the pastor's wife's name. Like they call the preacher's wife.
Yeah.
And they don't even say the name of the person. Like that's really degrading in my opinion. I think that just like people want to be called by their name, you want to be able to address your pastor's spouse by her name, and not just the preacher's wife. The preacher's wife did this. The preacher's wife said that. And I'm sorry to jump in, but that's exactly I wanted to say, because I think that the autonomy of the pastor's spouse need to just come to the forefront and not force them to be a gap filler.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have in-laws. They don't even call the preacher by the name. It's just the preacher and the preacher's wife. But it's like you sit there. It's like, don't they have a name? It is. It's a shame, because again, like I said, we downplay mental health so much, and I think we've downplayed it so much over the years that it is. I don't want to say it's epidemic wise, it's become an epidemic, but it is almost to that point where we've downplayed it so long that we're reaping we've never addressed it. Now all of a sudden it's right in front of our face. It's kind of like, years ago, the church decided, well, the best way to do things is to pull ourselves away from the world. Let's get out of society. Let's get out of politics, because that's not it. We want to build the kingdom. And now we look at our social and political structure and our status quo of American culture, and we realize, because we have been out for so long, it is a big challenge to go in and try to stand up for righteousness, holiness, and morality in a culture that the church decided for 40 to 50 years we need to focus on us, not everything else. So I think we kind of are at the point now where it is like blown up in our face. And
Yeah.
we need to address it, and we need to have outlets for us to be able to talk about it. I just think,
like
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's the whole concept of, oh, I'm going to serve God, and I've got to detach myself from the world, and that's what you're saying. I think that the struggle for people is, how do I detach myself from the world and yet remain, caring enough is the word, maybe, to be able to say, okay, and so like Jesus would say, be in the world, but be not of the world, right? And so this whole idea of you're not in a bubble, but at the same time, you've got to be able to connect with people, your neighbors. Like, a Samaritan man is going to stop by and see a wounded Jewish person, right? That's just what a neighbor is. It doesn't matter, what the cultural norms are. And so, yeah, I think, like, Buddhism says, detach yourself. And well, then what else is there? Yeah. And I think that's what makes Christianity better. It's not just detach yourself. We're saying attach yourself. And so if you don't attach yourself to something higher, you're going to have a hard time, defining who you are, so that you can make a difference in the world that you're living in. And so without attachment, with this vertical attachment, it's going to be hard for us to make any kind of a horizontal connection with those around us.
Right, for sure. And just kind of bouncing off of that whole idea, detaching from the world, we just think, well, if somebody's struggling with mental illness, then there's this part's wrong. The vertical part's wrong. So you can't, that you're just too worldly. And I think I just don't think we realize as believers how many people struggle on a day-to-day basis. That how many people on a Sunday morning, literally at times in their lives, at seasons in their lives, because we have a seasonal depression, based off of, where you live. But how many people struggle on a Sunday morning with depression to, like, I really just don't want to I would rather just stay here in my bed and be alone. I don't want to get up and go to church. What else can be offered? What else can be said to change, to help encourage me? I'm really, really, really struggling. And I think we as believers, especially within evangelicalism, need to start opening up conversation, real conversation, not just, well, there's a book written by John so-and-so. Go read his book. It'll help encourage you. We just send them to books. I think we really need to start looking for ways to open up conversation within our churches and within the lives of believers to really talk about what we struggle with, because I think our struggles are real. Our struggles are I'm hesitant to say that our struggles are authentic, but they are. What I struggle with on a day-to-day basis is real to me. That's my reality. And even though my reality and my identity is in Christ, my reality at that moment is some of my pistons aren't firing right neurologically. And I'm trying to work my way through that and trying to figure out, why do I struggle with this? Why do I struggle with this type of issue? Why do I struggle with anger? Why do I struggle with anxiety? Why can't I be, normal? And again, like I always say, normal is that setting on the washer. So you can change the speed as you go through, do a quick wash, do a deep load. But I think, do you think if we start having conversations, real conversations in our churches about this, that we might be able to make a greater impact for the kingdom? Having maybe doing a sermon series on, let's talk about some taboos of mental health. Let's talk about what Scripture says. Let's talk about examples. I mean, I can't think of a better example than David, of someone who went through depression, anxiety, anger, feeling alone, feeling rejected by God, feeling that you called me, but now things, I can't think of a better person who goes through all of the emotions that I feel with, wanting to not come out of a cave, wanting to just stay there and die, wanting to stay in bed all day and not go to church. I think of his life, and as I read through the Psalms and read through some Proverbs, I see me in those words. I see my conversation or my mental conversation sometimes at night when I lay down at bed or in the morning with God. God, why do I even want to get up today? Because I feel like I'm going to fail you. I feel like I'm going to try, and somewhere along the line, I'm going to blow it. And it's just, how can you fulfill your calling? I wonder if there are ways we can start talking about it. Now, I'm not saying where we just accept behaviors that refuse to change. I think there's a difference between addressing mental illness and working on it and trying to grow as a believer in Christ versus it's an excuse. Oh, well, I just have a mental illness and that's the way it is. I think there needs to be, because there are times where I get so frustrated. It's like, well, I'm just mentally ill. That's just the way it is. But then you have to sit there and think, well, that's so selfish. That's so ungodly in my response, because I'm not allowing Christ to grow me. Where can we begin? And I know I'm saying a lot, and I can tell your mind's going. Where can we begin? And is this something that we should start doing?
I think what you're saying, Michael, is dignity and compassion.
Mm.
I think we need to approach it with compassion and offer dignity to people.
Yeah.
And individuals need to feel that from us. Instead of saying, "What's the matter with you?" we should be saying, "What has happened to you that you feel this way?" Right? Like, what? It's the whole curiosity piece. Instead of trying to fix someone, we want to hear their story and allow them to share their story in a dignified way, and not victimize anybody. That's not what we're trying to do. What we want to do is tell them your story is valid.
Yeah.
It's important. And when people feel a compassionate approach and dignity for their identity, they'll open up more, and they'll feel more comfortable building bridges and learning to trust. We have done a poor job of offering this to our church. I'm talking about general sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People need to feel that, oh, I'm depressed. The pastor's not going to yell at me for not coming to church or for not seeing me. Like, I need to be able to feel that in the culture of the organization. Mm-hmm. In the culture of the organization, I need to know that I'm struggling and it's okay. They're not going to point their finger and sort of come down on me. And so dignity, when I say dignity, Michael, I think there's got to be space opened up for people to just sit and just share, and for opportunity for clinicians, even pastoral counselors, to be able to just listen and offer support. So I think if our churches, and this at the end of the day, it's going to require some training, some work, but if our churches can at least collaborate, like you're talking about, your wife Shauna works with an organization that collaborates with churches, like that is such a wonderful gift to the church, so that members of the church can say, "Oh, this organization is actually meeting in our church, and you can make an appointment and have an opportunity to talk to someone." And that individual is going to feel valued as a result of going and build relationships, and feel like I am somebody. I am not the person that was victimized when I was a child. I'm not the person that was abused. I'm not the person who, that even maybe a father or a mother or a caregiver said, "You're not going to amount to much. You're not valuable." And so those voices need to come out from individuals so that they don't stay in that schema, and exposing those schemas, letting those voices come out is the path towards healing. And we just need to make space for individuals to feel dignity and approach them with compassion.
Yeah. What thoughts would you have? Like, for instance, there are people who, have family members in their own families that struggle with mental illness, and it seems like you're with this individual for years, and they make progress, and then what's that one movie? What About Bob? Baby steps. They make baby steps, and then they start moving forward, and then something happens, and they have a manic moment, and they go back, many steps, many flights, and it keeps progressing through their life. But there's the attempt to keep making, but the continued default back to, say, the struggles that they face with. Let's talk about it. Anger seems to be the one that breaks down families the most sometimes, because you make steps toward it, and then something happens, and it's just like the snap button goes, and it seems like everything goes back to square one again. And it's like, the last 3 years were nice, the last 6 months were nice, now I just feel like we've lost ground. How do you what words of advice and wisdom can we say to the families that struggle with that, godly families that struggle, where they have a spouse, or they have a child or somebody in the house, and you're working and you're constantly moving, but then you get to a point where there's a complete fallback, and then you realize that there was a fallback, and it's like, again, not trying to use the mental health as the excuse, but trying to then say, okay,
right,
how can we then get to the next step so that if we fall back again, at least we fall back one less flight. What can we say to encourage those families? Don't give up, don't throw in the towel. This is real. This is real. People, this is a real struggle for that individual. I think when situations become unsafe, that's where you need to make that decision. But how do you encourage believers to look, this is real, we got to keep trying and keep moving forward and keep having grace and mercy, even if it feels like our grace and mercy gets trampled on?
Thanks again for this question. I think that it's very relevant to families, and it just provides some practical steps. Think through, what it was like for you to be in that age, if it's a loved one or a person. So let's say you're talking about a teenager or someone. What was it like for you in that stage? So try to put yourself in their sort of shoes or level of maturity, because what we find is we expect things from our children sometimes that are, not very realistic. I'll give you this example. My son, he's a great kid, but man, his room is a mess. Every time I walk into his room, it feels like I can't even find a space. So, and I ask myself, and I'm stuck at an opposite of that. I have to have everything in the right place, and I've got a folder for everything. And I ask myself the question: how long am I going to be upset about this? Now there's going to be days when I talk to him, but then the goal here is not, oh man, clean your room, and then lose my relationship with my son. Like, what's the point of that? Okay, clean room, but then he won't talk to me. So it doesn't really have a positive result. So I think that sort of action steps could be like, talking to that person, saying, hey, what do you imagine yourself doing at some stage of your life? Just putting that into their head. What are you imagining yourself doing 5 years from now? Or what it would be like if you were to overcome this habit of anger? What does that look like for you? What do you imagine our relationship to be like? Because let me just say that you brought up anger. Anger is actually, is a wrapping around pain. So a lot of times anger comes out because of unprocessed trauma or sadness or pain in individuals. And so they might not even know that, but as you discover the pain and trauma, you'll discover, man, I'm actually not angry at you. I may be yelling at you, but I'm actually yelling at my dad right now. And it might be just a lot of unprocessed anger that is displaced because it may be too difficult to go to that person. It might be just, mentally taxing to approach that person. And so we take it out on somebody else that we think we can.
Mhm.
And so a lot of our anger is just masqueraded in pain and suffering. And so just having honest conversations about what would it be like, So I would say start right there, and then sort of talking about the cravings of it, So like, what is the circumstance like, that you get angry or you get the craving for that addiction? Or what is that like? When does it happen? And
those trigger spots, those trigger moments. What is the trigger? Because sometimes it's like, you get to the point where you don't know the trigger. You don't, somewhere in the line, you flip the switch. The problem is you don't know when that switch gets flipped, whether it's you're depressed, whether you're angry, whether you get so anxious or fear or whatever. And again, the ability to sit down and have conversation with a therapist or counselor to start working through those. Okay, so this week when you blew it, where was that line? How far did you go? Right. Did you go further than you went last time? What was that like?
Yes, that's right.
How might that be if you would have waited another 3 minutes? Would the situation have de-escalated? Would it have been, was it really worth the headache at the end? Those sorts of things. But I struggle with the idea that we have so many people over the years, like you had said, we have done a disservice over the years, and hopefully this will encourage people to take a step back and realize I'm not abnormal. That's really the first thing that comes to mind as believers in Christ when we struggle with mental. Well, there's something wrong with me.
That's right.
There may not be anything wrong with you other than pistons firing different, and we've got the ability to fix those. It could be your past, and it's not directly you. Although I think we need to take responsibility for what our actions are as a result of what we experience. But I think there's always this. Well, I'm really not a good Christian. I'm less than because I struggle with this or that or the other thing, or mental illness. And I think that's a stigma like we need to overcome. And I think, we need to have a lot more grace on our pastors and our pastors' families, and realize that they are just as human as we are. They struggle with the same feelings, same emotions, same maybe mental thoughts. Again, the whole body, soul, and spirit, they're the same as we are. And there are times where it is, a pastor's going to go through a dry spell. And they may be going through a period where they are seeking, and God's just decided, I'm going to be quiet a little bit right now. And that may be because the Lord wants to challenge us to keep being faithful in the midst of those dry moments. Maybe something else is going on that the Lord wants to show us. And but there's a need for us to be real with our struggles, and the fact that we do struggle with. People struggle with mental illness, and as a church, as a Christian community, we need to be there for one another and wrap our arms around one another, instead of, you had said, having people where they give space to listen. I think that is where we start, because when you go in as believers, if you're a person like me, I want to fix everything. Okay, I listen to you. Now let's fix it. Let's fix you. Let's fix it. I have to have the program to fix it so it goes back to normal. But sometimes we just need to be a sounding board and a set of ears and not say anything. One of the things with one of the jobs I work with, and I talk with students all the time as they're going through their program, is sometimes silence is good. You always hear silence is golden, that you always say to your kids, like, be quiet, silence is, but silence is good, because really sometimes people don't want the answer. They don't need a response. They just need to know that someone is going to be there, wrap their arms around them, and just listen. And sometimes that's the start to moving forward in helping somebody who struggles with mental illness into healing.
That's right. You know, that empathetic listening aspect of it is something that therapists really, really emphasize. If you've heard of John and Julie Gottman, they talk about this this aspect of couples in crisis, and what do they need, and what they are saying here is that they can actually observe a couple in conflict and predict the kind of relationship they have based on how they respond in conflict, because generally speaking, there's just not a lot of empathetic listening. You know, it's just, we're just trying to make our point. But you know, you're sitting down and your wife is telling you something that happened today. I was at the gas station, and you know, and I just saw this person across from me who's really struggling, and they're arguing with one another, and I wanted to go and help them. She just wants to share the story, and I think what we do generally is saying, "Well, what did you do?" And you should have done that. You should have just got in your car. You don't know if they. And so we think of all the different possible things that could have happened, or what she should have done or he should have done. And instead of just saying, I'm here to just listen. And so what was that like for you? What were some things going through your mind? Because there's a reason why she's sharing that story. It could remind them of her parents or her grandparents or her neighbors or something. And so I was just wanted to just reinforce what you were saying, Michael. It's just that I think we need to just empathetic listening without offering any kind of solution, because that's when that person feels like they were heard for just being heard, not heard for solutions, but heard as a result of just being listened to. But yes, that's so significant.
Yeah, that is great. Any other thoughts? I mean, I've had some great conversation. This has been a great topic. I think it's a topic that definitely has to continue to be talked about in our evangelical circles, because there's just a cultural stigma within Christianity when it comes to mental health. And it's challenging because as believers, we live in two different cultures. We live in two different worlds. We live in the culture of biblical worldview, and we live in the culture of broken down, liberal America. That let's redefine everything. We have to be able to have that safe place, and it's concerning when we feel that the safe place we only have as believers, or believers who struggle with mental health, are at the psychiatrist's office, who happens to be a non-believing psychiatrist. So you come in and you struggle, or you have a child that struggles with gender identity, and you want to try to teach them what God has called them to be, and then they go see somebody that says, "Oh, you can do whatever you want, be whatever you want," because that's, So I think we've got to refocus when it comes as believers in Christ, because the ultimate goal really is to grow as a disciple of Christ. The ultimate goal for us here as believers is to grow and as a disciple of Jesus Christ. And it's a journey. I think a lot of times we think we have to get to this point to where we arrive. And I've met many people, and I'm sure you have in ministry, who they don't even listen to you unless you are at either a certain age or a certain degree level or something, because they feel, well, if you're not at this point, then you have nothing worth listening to. And I think we've got to overcome that. I mean, when you think about the relationship between Timothy and Paul kept encouraging the believers that you need to listen to Timothy, not because of, Timothy's spiritual son, but in the culture, Timothy was younger than the age expected of culture to have anything worth value of saying. I mean, you had to reach a certain point, age group, within your culture to even be listened to back in ancient Rome. And sometimes we do that within our own circles of society, that if you don't have this degree, then we can't listen to you. You don't have this experience, then you're not worth. And I think we need to break those barriers down so that we can begin to move forward. But that's really it. I mean, growing as a disciple of Christ is a journey. It's a lifetime journey. We are never going to arrive until he calls us home or comes back. And I think we need, in doing that, we also need to be authentic in who we are and the struggles that we have as believers, and that it's not abnormal. Mental health is not abnormal. It's just a starting point to where we can continue to grow as a disciple of Christ and try to be transformed into his image.
Thanks for having me today. And it's true. We're all on a journey, right? And I think that mental health requires us paying attention to our body, our soul, and our spirit. It's biochemistry, it's behavior, and it's spiritual.
Yeah.
And we just can't focus on one aspect without focusing on the other. I think it's just a multi-dimensional issue. There's things that happen to us, happening to us now, that is going to require support. Of course, from God. I mean, even as you pay attention to going to AA meetings and things like that, that even a higher power is a significant piece in the 12-step process, right? And so, learning the importance of knowing God and being able to pay attention to my body and my mind, and really connecting with relationships. I think these are central, and it takes a lot of intentionality for us to be able to get to a place of wholeness.
Great. Well, it was great to have you on the show. And again, just want to encourage you, those of you who are listening, to continue to work at and strive to be a disciple of Christ, walking day and day with him, encouraging you to grow as a disciple of Christ. I'm Mike Beckett, the host of The Dead Prophet, and we will see you next time on our show. Have a great day.